Do the Denver Broncos have the best wide receiver group in the entire AFC West? We go through and we compare the Broncos wide receiver core with the Las Vegas Raiders, Los Angeles Chargers, and the Kansas City Chiefs. We make the comparisons and we weigh the pros and cons. Plus, we factor in some of Broncos country's feedback on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked on Network and 9 News. Broncos country, thank you so much for making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, whether it's on your favorite audio podcasting platform, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, or whether you watch us here on YouTube and you like to interact in the comment section, make sure you go ahead, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sarah, my friend, hey, it's great to be with you here once again for another episode of the show. Obviously, everything for Broncos country here, but kind of getting to the point as we build up to the NFL draft, there's not a lot of Broncos news going on, which I guess like no news can technically be good news in a sense. However, I know there's still some positions, the Broncos, and I know that we feel like they should probably add some guys, especially as market value starts to dwindle down. But let's take a look at the comparison of the Broncos wide receiving core against the other teams in the AFC West and their receiving core, man. So let's start things off here with the Las Vegas Raiders.
I love it, Cody. I love talking about the Broncos wide receiver core because I personally feel like, it's one of the best in the league. So I love, and especially now we got Devonte Adams in the division, Tyreek Hill moving out of the division, some continuity with the Chargers. I think this is going to be interesting to talk about, but we got at the top of our show notes here, Courtland Sutton versus Bryan Edwards. Bryan Edwards was a guy, Cody, that I really liked coming out of the draft out of South Carolina. I was kind of hoping the Broncos would take him as a developmental prospect, but then ultimately Tim Patrick kind of had his breakout time and got his second deal, so it didn't really end up being necessary. But I think, Bryan Edwards is a solid player. He's made some good plays even against the Broncos, but how can you bet against Courtland Sutton here? I feel like Courtland Sutton is easily the guy that I would take out of these two.
Well, I think that's a fair point, too, especially with Courtland Sutton, too. I think we look at ceiling, we look at the type of impact, we look at the potential, I think, in all these players here. And obviously, Sutton has the size advantage in comparison to a guy like Bryan Edwards, who's only about 6'3", a couple inches shorter than Court. But, I think for his utilization, we started to see Bryan Edwards kind of ball out a little bit with Derek Carr at one point last season, especially after the Henry Ruggs debacle and what happened there. But I think that a majority of people too, I think even if you ask Raiders fans, you ask Chargers fans and Chiefs fans, if they had to choose between Courtland Sutton or Bryan Edwards, I imagine they'd all probably take Courtland Sutton. So, that might be a little bit of a straw poll if there's another, fan watching or listening to the show that's a fan of one of these teams in the AFC West. Hey, let us know what you think. Be respectful. We're always open to that too. But let's go to another player here too, especially you mentioned him previously about, a player who obviously balled out and got a second contract. Well, let's talk about Tim Patrick. Back-to-back 6 touchdown seasons for him. So 12 touchdowns in the last 2 years for him. He's been the Broncos, I'd say, arguably most impactful player at wide receiver, most consistent. We talk about a guy who hardly drops a pass. I believe he had his first drop pass this year, and it was just one of those concentration drops. Outside of that, he hadn't dropped a pass, I believe, in several years at that point, too. But here's also the other thing, too. I think when we look in comparison for Tim Patrick against Darren Waller, it's kind of hard to compare this guy to this guy because of what Darren Waller's role really is. He's a tight end that plays wide receiver, and he's put out on the outside. He's put in line. So can we really make the comparison here between what Tim Patrick does and Darren Waller? Tim Patrick, in my opinion, is quarterback proof. Darren Waller, one of the best athletes in the entire NFL with his size and his speed. I don't feel like you can really go in this whole pick in one or the other because they're entirely two different positions, but we're talking about receiving threats here.
I think you're right about that too, Cody. I think that's definitely a fair assessment to say, hey, are these guys even really comparable? But I do wonder, if you were to give them the same target share, who would actually have better production? I feel like obviously the way that Tim Patrick is used as a primarily outside receiver instead of a tight end hybrid receiver, type of player. I feel like Tim Patrick with a quarterback, I mean, like you said, he's quarterback proof. He's been putting up the production, not dropping passes, even though I mean, who the heck is even throwing me the ball today? That kind of thing is going on for him. But I think I would be very fascinated to see. We can't know this, so it would be a flaming hot take for me to sit here and say, well, I would easily take Tim Patrick over Darren Waller. But
Yeah.
I do wonder, hey, what are we going to see this year when Tim Patrick has Russell Wilson throwing him the ball? And, by comparison to Darren Waller, who's not going to have as big of a target share. I just feel like Tim Patrick has proven himself to be so valuable to the Denver Broncos, regardless of, like you said, whoever's playing quarterback. Now you have Russell Wilson playing quarterback, and I think things are going to be a little different this year. So while I do respect everything Darren Waller is doing, one of the best tight ends in the game, I think to each their own on this one. I would say, I mean, Tim Patrick,
Yeah.
he's kind of becoming a cult favorite for Denver Broncos fans.
Hey, rightfully so too. But you mentioned it. The Broncos this year, they actually have a quarterback. And it's like, what is that going to do for this offense here? Like, what would Russell Wilson do for a guy like even Darren Waller? I mean, Derek Carr's like pretty damn good. Like, don't get me wrong. But it's like, hey, when you have a good quarterback, it can elevate everybody around you. Going back to Peyton Manning back in the epic 2013 season where they had so many receivers with, close to 1,000 yards, and each guy had 10 plus touchdowns each in terms of receiving touchdowns. That's how good, Peyton Manning elevated those guys there. So there is that, but this isn't interesting. This isn't necessarily like, who would you rather have here, but just looking at how the Broncos wide receiving core stacks up against the Raiders. And I just mainly put this based on where I think these guys are going to line up: outside guys versus outside guys, inside guys versus inside guys. Here's Jerry Jeudy, and I got him, and obviously Devonte Adams now introduced there. Devonte Adams, you can say it right here, and I think I'm very confident saying this. And look, if this upsets Broncos country, like I'm just telling the truth. Devonte Adams is the best wide receiver in the entire National Football League from a production standpoint, from what he's able to do as a route runner. He creates separation himself. And look, now you got two guys who are really good at creating separation. I believe in 2021, Jerry Jeudy actually had the most yards created in separation. Unfortunately, couldn't have a quarterback throwing the ball consistently. Now you pair up. Arguably, you can say, hey, the AFC West might have the best route running wide receivers in the league. When we're talking about Keenan Allen, Davante Adams, and Jerry Jeudy, hey, you know what? I'm all with that. I think that's exciting there. But for Jerry Jeudy, this is a big year for him. It's going to have to be a big step up year for him, I think, in the eyes of Broncos country and maybe in the eyes of Jerry Jeudy. And I think that's something that everyone's wondering. Like, Jerry Jeudy has all this potential, but his production has not yet matched that. Where you look at Davante Adams, it doesn't matter who's throwing him the ball. He's a guy that's going to create separation, get his opportunities, and all you have to do is toss it to him, and he's going to make plays against double coverage, triple coverage. So he's a real legitimate threat here. But Sayre, I want to transition now to KJ Hamler, and we talk about just comps in terms of maybe where they play. You can see him in the slot, but even Hunter Renfro as well. I mean, the AFC West between these two teams, they are loaded at with their four deep wide receivers that they currently have here.
They are, and I just want to clarify really quick: the yards of separation for Jerry Jeudy was not because he was 10 yards behind the line of scrimmage running in motion, right? It was because he's actually a good route runner. But you're absolutely right. These are the two teams, I think, in this division, Cody, with the best groups of wide receivers and pass catchers, and you just the fact just running down this list just highlights that, right?
Yeah.
We're at the bottom of this list, and it's Hunter Renfro and KJ Hamler, two guys that I think Hunter Renfro obviously more proven at this point. KJ Hamler, very big time potential,
Yeah.
tremendous speed. Maybe now without Tyreek Hill, maybe he's the fastest receiver in the division. So I think that, I mean, this is going to be so much fun to watch. I just can't wait for the games to start. Just talking about this kind of stuff gets me pumped, and I love Hunter Renfro. You know how much you love a player on a rival team by how much you actively hate them during the
Yeah.
season. He's one of those guys that I just can't stand. So I love the way that he plays the game, man. He's so good. And it's just a tremendous testament to the way that the Raiders have been able to develop this talent. Because aside from Devonte Adams, like these guys they've brought up through that Raiders system. Either Darren Waller kind of coming in off the practice squad, which that was a thing, by the way, and Hunter Renfro, mid-round pick, Bryan Edwards, mid-round pick. So it's cool to see how they've been developed, similar to the Broncos with like Tim Patrick and players like that. So I think it's
Yeah.
going to be fun to watch these two squads.
Well, the Broncos are going to have their hands full in terms of the secondary. Like, this is a tough task for them to cover. And I'd say if we had to give an advantage right now to any of these two teams, like, I'd say when we talk about just overall productivity, like, you can make the argument these are the top two groups of wide receivers in the division. Part of me is going to give the advantage here to the Raiders because of Davante Adams, because of a Darren Waller, guys with more proven, consistent production. Tim Patrick is better, in my opinion, than Bryan Edwards and Hunter Renfro. However, the rest of the supporting cast here for Denver, they have to prove it with their production, not just potential. Like, potential can only carry you so far, but now it's on them and the Broncos offense to produce here in 2022. But now, how did the Broncos wide receiving core stack up against the Los Angeles Chargers? How does Courtland Sutton compare in comparison to Mike Williams, Jerry Jeudy, to Keenan Allen, and much more? We dive into all the angles of this coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting needs and sports information. And you can find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championship odds, podcasts, and reviews for all the different leagues this upcoming season. And BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, sir, as we jump into the second half action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. Once again, Broncos country, mile high salute to you. Thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself appreciate you. We're going through the Broncos wide receivers as it compares to the rest of the wide receiver groups inside the AFC West. We will share some Broncos country fan feedback to this question a little bit later on here in the show here, but starting things off here with the Los Angeles Chargers. We've already talked about guys like Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler, but now we need to talk about the opposition here for the LA Chargers. Now, first off, I'd say Mike Williams. We talk about possession threat. I mean, you could really compare Tim Patrick and Courtland Sutton to a guy like Mike Williams in terms of how they play style there. You can throw the ball up to them. They're going to go up and get it. I think for Denver, having two of those guys is a great advantage for them to have. But, even for the Chargers, we saw it firsthand when the Broncos played the Chargers this season and in the last couple of years. Justin Herbert loves going to Mike Williams, and especially in games for the Denver Broncos. Those two have a connection where they go at each other a lot. I mean, Denver is tested by Justin Herbert and by Mike Williams consistently. It's nice that Denver has a secondary, though, because we even saw Patrick Surtain and Ronald Darby kind of chipping back and kind of, negating the impact that these guys have here. This is an interesting dynamic because I feel like I don't know if you could go wrong. If you had to pick between having Courtland Sutton on your team or Mike Williams, I feel like everybody, like, you'd be okay either way. Like, there's not a wrong answer here. Like I said, we cover the Broncos, so we probably have a little bit more love and appreciation for Cortland. But man, like, you can't go wrong here. I think if you're a football fan, choosing between these two guys.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Mike Williams got a second contract just like Courtland Sutton did. I mean, those guys have proven themselves on the field. Like we talk about in the first segment, we talked a lot about potential, what this guy could look like with a QB or how Jerry Judy's going to be, KJ Hamler. But Courtland Sutton is a Pro Bowl. He's got a Pro Bowl on his, on his resume. Yeah. And Mike Williams has been tremendous with Justin Herbert as well, like you said. So these are two guys, big body guys that you definitely don't want, to get a one-on-one matchup downfield with, because a lot of times either they're going to come down with the ball or they're going to draw a penalty because they're so good at creating separation at the catch point. They just do whatever it takes with that ball in the air to come down with it. And Mike Williams, I think that's the part of his game, Cody, to me, that's really become kind of scary in recent years, is that he's gone from being more of like a 50-50 guy to being more of like a, if the ball is even close to where he's at, it's going to get sucked in like a vacuum. Yep. So he's a scary receiver with Justin Herbert throwing him the ball, because when you have a quarterback that knows how to utilize a guy with a big catch radius, that's dangerous, even no matter how good your DBs are.
Let's take a look at some of the other guys too, because I honestly feel like you can make the argument here. And I don't necessarily know about the number 3 receiver, number 4 receiver here for the Chargers, but I feel like when we talk about best wide receiving units, I mean, like we said, it's a toss-up between the Raiders, the Broncos at this point. And the Chargers obviously have 2 premier guys in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams here, Sayre, and I think it's one thing to look at, but it's like behind those guys, they have Josh Palmer, who kind of emerged a little bit. He's one of those kind of, high upside guys that hasn't really reached his full potential yet because he hasn't fully been utilized in this offense. Then you have Jalen Guyton, who's kind of that speed threat there. And so when we compare, maybe Tim Patrick to a Josh Palmer in terms of that role, Tim Patrick probably has the production and the history to kind of say, hey, he's got the advantage here. KJ Hamler, we look at potential, man. I tell you what, if we can look at a little bit of some of the things he did in 2020 against the Carolina Panthers, there's that. Unfortunately, his 2021 season was cut short due to the fact that, he just got thrown a bad football and unfortunately came down awkwardly on the ground and had that freak ACL injury. And it just, it sucks things like that happen. But, you look at KJ Hamler and Jalen Guyton, I feel like it's a coin flip in terms of maybe what you're going to get. They have that same type of role here for this offense here for both teams. I just feel like Denver probably has three guys that probably have more potential to produce in comparison to the three guys that maybe LA has, which is, it sounds insulting to say because it's Mike Williams, it's Keenan Allen, arguably two top 15 wide receivers in the NFL.
Yeah, and it's absolutely all due respect to those guys, right?
Yeah.
No disrespect meant to Keenan Allen or obviously Mike Williams, who are very good receivers. But at the same time, just the Broncos group is just deeper than the Chargers group. Even as top heavy as it is, I just think it's a deeper group. And the Chargers know full well what KJ Hamler is capable of. I mean, he caught that game-winning touchdown against them and had one of, arguably some of his best moments against them in the limited time that we have seen him. So I just think what the Broncos group brings to the table compared to this group is a little bit more dynamic. It wouldn't even surprise me, Cody, to see the Chargers maybe use their first round pick on somebody like maybe a Chris Olave or somebody like that could really be
scary.
It would be, and I hate to even think about that, but I just think that it feels, just as we're talking about it, doesn't it just feel kind of like that group for them is just a little incomplete? I know Josh Palmer was a third-round pick out of Tennessee and kind of a surprise third-round pick. I don't know that anyone really had him projected in that range. So I just feel like they're one guy away, and I know they have other needs, like who's the right tackle going to be for them, but I still think in the draft, maybe another wide receiver like a Chris Olave, or maybe Garrett Wilson falls, or maybe Treylon Burks or something like that. I don't know. Anybody that could really just add to the dynamic of their offense and take pressure off Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. I think they need a little something like that.
It'll be nice to see a little bit of that push there too. And I think for the Broncos in comparison to the Chargers, as I said, I think the advantage goes to a deeper Broncos wide receiver group here. But you know what? Like I said, I would take Mike Williams and Keenan Allen on my team if I were a GM any day of the week. Like, they are fantastic wide receivers. So I hope no Chargers fan hears what we're talking about here and interprets it as disrespect. None intended at all. I mean, these guys are absolute dogs, and we would love him. Like, if they were wearing orange and blue too, I mean, Sayre, we'd be pretty dang happy there with that outcome. But maybe how did the Denver Broncos compare with the Chiefs wide receiver group? You can maybe make the argument why the Chiefs have the worst wide receiver group amongst the entire AFC West. We talk about that and much more coming up here in just a moment. Plus, share some Broncos country's thoughts on this question, as is how the Broncos wide receiver group stacks up against the rest of the AFC West. You get that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about Rock Auto, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And if you need anything for your vehicle, rockauto.com. They have everything. Whether you're a professional or a do-it-yourselfer, rockauto.com has all the parts that you need for your car or truck, whether you're working on a project in the garage or if it's for your daily driver. They have everything you need in a click of a button or in the palm of your hand with your cell phone at rockauto.com. And one thing I really love about rockauto.com's website, they make it super easy to navigate and find the parts and whatever you need for your vehicle based on year, make, model, the brand, specifications, and even the prices that you prefer. So why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or 100% more from a local chain auto parts store or a car dealership when you can get them cheaper at rockauto.com? Prices are always reliably low at rockauto.com, and I love that they've been a family-owned business that's been serving auto parts customers for over 20 years. 20 years of reliable service, rockauto.com. So head over to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Lockdown Broncos in there. How did you hear about us box so that they know that we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need, rockauto.com. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, once again, Broncos country, thank you so much for your continued support and interaction here at the Lockdown Broncos podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day for all the daily Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage that you need. Enjoying us in the morning with a fresh cup of coffee on YouTube or your favorite podcast and provider on your way to work, on your way to the gym, whatever you may have there. We appreciate your support and you staying locked in here to the Lockdown Broncos podcast. Sayre, let's talk about the Broncos wide receivers in comparison to Kansas Kansas City's here real quick, and then we'll get to some Broncos fans' responses. For Kansas City, okay, we've already talked about Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler. We can throw Albert Okwuegbunam in this situation because one of Kansas City's top receiving threats is a tight end here. But the Chiefs, after trading away Tyreek Hill, they have Marquez Valdes-Scantling coming over from the Green Bay Packers. A little bit of a wild card there. Could be a really good pickup for them, but right now unproven and unknown at this point. Juju Smith-Schuster, the interesting one coming over from the Pittsburgh Steelers, a really good blocking wide receiver here. However, his production has dropped off the last couple of years from the receiving standpoint. Obviously, he got injured last year against the Broncos from Kareem Jackson. Mecole Hardman really is the biggest wild card factor, I think, out of all the wide receivers here on Kansas City because they initially drafted him to potentially play that Tyreek Hill role when they thought that Tyreek Hill was not going to be available due to suspension. Now he's gone. The expectations are that he's going to have to step up and be what Tyreek Hill was in this offense with Patrick Mahomes. And then there's Travis Kelce, who can literally do anything and everything. The most versatile tight end in the game. You can make the argument from a run blocking standpoint, pass blocking, pass receiving, yards after the catch. He is a legitimate threat from the outside, inside the slot, in line. He is one of the best athletes in the entire National Football League, and he's been a thorn in the side of the Denver Broncos for many, many years since Denver used to have dominance over the division. Hasn't been that way lately. And then you add in Josh Gordon, who's kind of another wild card. Like, we do not know how it's going to pan out right now. But in your opinion, sir, like, how would you stack up the Broncos wide receiver group with Kansas City's? Who would you take in this position? And then we'll get to some Broncos fans' responses.
Well, I think the only player that I would take over what the Broncos have right now, Cody, is Travis Kelce, honestly. And if, I might start breaking my own fantasy football rule. I hate to even say it, but I don't draft guys from the division, Cody, but I might start drafting some AFC West guys. I might draft Travis Kelce because, man, he might set a NFL record for the most targets for a tight end ever this season. I mean, he's going to be busy because I don't have confidence in any of those receivers that you talked about. Honestly, I mean, Juju Smith-Schuster, he's got to be hoping that Kareem Jackson doesn't re-sign in Denver. And Mecole Hardman, I think we would have seen at least glimpses of, yeah, sure, he can take over the Tyreek Hill. Like, there's always a natural progression for some guys in the NFL that you're like, yes, he definitely is ready to take on a bigger role for a new team. Like Emmanuel Sanders, when he left the Pittsburgh Steelers, it was clear he was ready for a bigger role. But with Mecole Hardman, we just haven't seen that. He's been given a lot of opportunities, and we haven't seen that. And Juju Smith-Schuster seems to have kind of regressed in recent years. You blame Ben Roethlisberger all you want. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, for all we talked about these Green Bay Packers not investing in the receiver position all these years, he's been there for the last 4. So if we've been complaining from the outside looking in at Aaron Rodgers isn't getting any help, well, Marquez Valdes-Scantling was one of his best guys. So we think that he's automatically just going to be great now that he's getting paid $10 million a year and he's in Kansas City. I don't personally buy that. I think the Chiefs went the discount route at wide receiver, and they're banking on the offense, the system being great. And I guess we'll see.
Well, one thing too, and I'll say this about Mecole Hardman, for some reason against the Broncos, he's always had these big time impact plays, right? Like if the Broncos defense is doing really well, which in last year, like the last 2 seasons, the Broncos defense against KC has been pretty dang good. Like they found ways to fluster him, and they held Tyreek Hill to his lowest output total in his career back when they played on Sunday Night Football. Unfortunately, Teddy Bridgewater threw all those interceptions. So Denver did a really good job in the last couple of matchups here against Kansas City. But outside of that, in terms of maybe how Broncos country is feeling about how the Broncos wide receivers stack up against KC, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Las Vegas Raiders wide receivers, we took to our Denver Broncos community on Twitter. Make sure you join it. It's the fastest growing and the largest population-based Broncos community on Twitter here. Kyle Black, our good friend and supporter of the show, says there are 3 teams with excellent wide receivers. He says, I think Los Angeles Chargers has the most proven duo. Las Vegas has the best wide receiver, and the Broncos have the most depth. The Chiefs have Kelce and a bunch of question marks. KC is behind the other 3. And I'd say really that kind of summarizes kind of where we've been at here on the show so far. And I think that's a pretty accurate depiction there of that here. But then here's Colorado Sports Take, says the wide receiver corps for Denver, Vegas, and LA are similar. We don't have the high-end talent of Adams or even a Keenan Allen, but no one else has a wide receiver 3 as good as Tim Patrick or a wide receiver 4 as impactful as KJ Hamler, and KC's wide receivers suck. And he put LOL there. I would say this too in terms of like KJ, like, we know what KJ can do, but we haven't seen it just yet. So I think it's a stretch to kind of go there in a sense. Here's the last one I'll read off here, and I'll get your thoughts here. Eric Park, good friend, supporter of the show, says, the Broncos have the potential to be the best collectively in the division with size, speed, route running. If Jeudy becomes who we think he will be, there's no way to cover him. Sutton and Patrick, and that's before the X factor of KJ Hamler blowing the top off the defense. If they can do that, good things can happen for this Broncos offense. And look, a lot of it's going to be started with quarterbacks, Sayre. I mean, your thoughts on kind of some of the responses we've heard from Broncos country?
Man, those are all spot on, really. I mean, yes, we talked about it in the previous segments. There's a potential factor with some of the Broncos guys, but at the same time, we've seen a number of these players. I look back to Jerry Jeudy's rookie season, really, Cody, for proof that, hey, this guy is the real deal. We saw him making big play after big play, even with some of the drop issues. So there is some projection with the Broncos, but I think everybody seems to be on the right wavelength, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Devonte Adams is the best wide receiver in the NFL, certainly the division. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams make up the best duo in the division, but the Broncos have the deepest group. And then I love the Chiefs. They suck, but Tyreek Hill, he would have been the number 2 best receiver in the division if he was still on the Chiefs, right? And
yeah,
he's maybe the number 2 wide receiver in the NFL. Arguably, depending on who you ask, So I think that those people, those commenters who responded in the community group, that they're spot on there. Those assessments are right on with what we were saying, and I think that's exactly where we're at heading into the season, with the Broncos having now the potential with a quarterback in place to really take that next step and maybe be that number 1 overall team, like unquestioned.
Well, Kansas City could really make things kind of scary, I think, in the division, depending on what they do with their first-round picks. Obviously, at 29 and 30, they could get a really good wide receiver there, too. And some people have talked about Jameson Williams being one of those potential guys. So we talk about just that connection. That would be rough. Like, he wouldn't play in 2022, but, in 2023, he's going to be there if that's one of their selections there. So, the AFC West is just loaded with talent. I think in terms of skill players, if anybody could draw from the AFC West, I think every other division, for the most part in the NFL, would draw from the AFC West at wide receiver. There's so much talent to be had there. And obviously, when you have 4 top quarterbacks in the NFL in one division, it makes things certainly more interesting. But Broncos country, Chiefs kingdom, Chargers, I don't even know what their thing is. Chargers Nation, it might be something like that. And even like Raiders Nation, I know there's a whole kind of conundrum in terms of that, like who gets called what. But if you're a fan of these teams and you're listening, make sure you let us know what you think down below. Always keep the comments respectful. This is open for all the discussion possible here on YouTube, on our Twitter comment section. Make sure you can tweet us at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. We look forward to hearing from all of you after today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But with that said, Broncos country, stay tuned here all week long and all year long. Sayre Bedinger and myself, we have you covered every single day. All things Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage, bite-sized, short, and sweet, to the point. You get that. Plus, you get the interaction here as well. So hit that subscribe button and make sure you're following on your favorite podcast provider. We appreciate you so much, Broncos country. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Sayre Bedinger and myself will see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.